Hello and welcome to History Through Fiction, the podcast. I'm your host, Colin Mustful, and today I am excited to be joined by Todd Otis, author of the novel Sparks of the Revolution. Todd, hi.
Hi, good to be with you, Colin.
So why don't you just start by telling us who is James Otis and why should we know about this guy?
James Otis was a lawyer in Boston in the 1760s, and he was a person who was very involved in the very beginnings of the resistance. He argued a case against the British Crown concerning what was called the writs of assistance. He had been the king's lawyer in the Admiralty Court, but then he switched sides after some merchants persuaded him to argue against these writs of assistance, where customs officials would just go into homes and invade their homes or churches or wherever looking for smuggled goods. So at that point in 1761, Otis's argument of that case led to a new level of resistance to the British. And so the arc of the book is the increasing level of resistance, whether it's objecting to the sugar tax or the stamp tax or other taxes. And as the resistance grew, Otis was very prominent in the 1760s, but started to suffer from severe mental illness, including one that was caused by a beating that he took at the fists of customs officials and British soldiers. They almost killed him, and so the book is about him and his role in particularly people like Sam Adams and John Hancock, Otis's sister Mercy Otis Warren, and then the so-called first victim of the Boston Massacre was Crispus Attucks, and his heritage was his mother came from the Wampanoag tribe in North America who'd been here 10 or 12,000 years, and his father was a slave. And to me, he's symbolic of the unfinished business of what this democracy is all about. But Otis was really key in the 1760s for creating the language and the ideals of our great democracy.
Let's get a little bit more into these writs of assistance. I used to teach high school social studies. It's not in the curriculum. Can you give us a little context? When did they start applying that, and what exactly did it mean? What was the significance of it?
It started to be applied in 1760, and the significance was that anybody, whether they were customs officials or even other people, could kind of authorize themselves to go into homes, churches, businesses looking for smuggled goods. And they dared without any authorization. Um, when the legal case came up, the case was made that it had been an idea under Charles II to allow this to happen, but it was a significant kind of arbitrary use of power without any real accountability. And so it became a matter of general just distress, and yet they were British subjects, and this case was pivotal in terms of starting to turn them against the British power.
And what inspired you to investigate this further and to spend your time in order to tell others about James Otis and about these events leading up to the American Revolution?
Well, I had heard about him because my name is Otis too, and turns out we're like second cousins. Uh, but I'd always heard about him growing up. My dad was actually named James Otis too, and he mentioned him. And then when I was close to retirement and then retired, I wanted to look into it more. I had heard that in his mental illness at the end of his life, he burned most of his papers. And so I knew that it would be hard, but there was this wonderful biography written by one of John Adams' clerks in 1828. It's full of good information, and part of the material that I wrote was derived from this 1828 biography of Otis. So I just was curious. But then when I read that John Adams quote, I thought, wow, if this is when the child independence was born, that takes it to a whole different level in terms of interest. So that motivated me to do it. And I had to do it in a historical novel format because of the fact that he had burned all of his papers.
You had mentioned Christopher Sider and this his murder that happened days before the Boston Massacre. I think most Americans are familiar with the Boston Massacre, but not familiar with the events leading up to it. Can you talk a little bit more about that event that led to the Boston Massacre?
Yes, I had never heard about it either. And basically, here's the scene. It's nighttime, about a week before the Boston Massacre, and the citizens of Boston were kind of chasing a customs official because of something he had done. And he ran into his house, and there was by now a fairly large crowd assembled. And he got his musket out and shot into the crowd. And he killed 11-year-old Christopher Sider. And so the impact on the citizens of Boston, and remember, this is a town of 15,000. It's not a big place, but it's people who know each other and care. The funeral of Christopher Sider was said to be the biggest funeral up until that time in any of the colonies. It was 500 kids in front of the casket, a casket going down the street that had thousands of people following it. So the mood was really set. By the time a week later the massacre happened, you can imagine how the anger and frustration of the citizens was at a peak.
I'd like to. All of this seems painfully relevant. So I'm going to date mark us here. We're now speaking on June 16th, 2025. I don't know when this might be published or when people might be listening to it. I should also mention that we are both in Minnesota, in the United States of America. Um, so in 1768, the British sent 2,000 troops into Boston, and Benjamin Franklin said, they will not find a rebellion. They may indeed make one. And it's hard not to think of what just happened in Los Angeles with the National Guard being federalized and some military troops being sent in there, and the backlash to that, or the response in the No Kings protests that happened throughout the country just 2 days ago. Can you talk a little bit about how those histories are related and the relevance of understanding our history, and how that tradition continues, that tradition of back and forth between the people and the government?
I really do think a major lesson learned from what you referred to as the 1768 troops coming into Boston, uh, that changed the whole tone. They were no longer being treated as respected subjects of Britain. Uh, and so the expectation there was they were going to intimidate the colonists into obeying whatever the British said. And so I think that the first lesson learned at the back of the book is if you treat me like an enemy, I will become your enemy. And as opposed to treat me with civility, we may disagree. It's the kind of politics we want is where you have different opinions and respectfully disagree. But if you treat me as an enemy, that takes things to a whole different level. And I'm concerned that we're not learning the lesson, and that some of the activities going on nationally have shown more of a mindset of you're my enemy than in you're another citizen who I respect but disagree with. And so I think there is some applicability, Colin, to what we learned from the growing anger and frustration in Boston to what's happening right now. We can't treat each other like enemies, starting with the White House. The president needs to change his tone and other politicians on both the left and right have to do that too. So I think there is a lesson to be learned there, Colin.
I want to bring up another current event. So we recently announced that we're going to be hosting a writing conference in Beverly, Massachusetts in 2026. It's called a Writing Revolution. So we're relating it to the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution or of independence and the importance of writing. And I think your novel shows how those written words can have so much power. In particular, I want to reference Mercy Otis Warren, who I believe you said is a sister of James Otis.
Yes,
Can you talk about the narratives that she created and why her putting writing those words were so powerful?
she was a really brilliant playwright and poet, and uh, she she was very loyal to both her brother and to the ideals that he was fighting for. For me, she's kind of one of the superstars and nobody's heard of. And so her writing, as you suggest, uh, inflamed people, but she did it in the most elegant way. And she did a play called The Idolater, in which she had one line that I I just struck me. She said, "That man dies well who sheds his blood for freedom." And she had a deep patriotic strain, but she was had this elegant ability to write. And in a town of 15,000, Colin, I mean, you can imagine people are reading stuff and connecting with each other and telling each other about it in a way that pretty much everybody is absorbing it. Boston was more literate than London. The people and the citizens of Boston had a higher literacy rate than London. So it's like the people of Boston were, even if they hadn't got a degree, were well educated, smart, and talking to each other about this stuff. And she was one of the, I think she and Sam Adams were two of the most persuasive public relations people in the whole pre-revolutionary period.
In your little publicity sheet, you have a question on there in your interview, who should read this book? I'd like to give you an opportunity because I think it's important to tell us who should read this book.
Well, I really wish that, um, first of all, people who really care about public affairs generally, Democrat or Republican, uh, the book had nice blurbs from Senator Klobuchar, the Democrat, and Tom Ridge, former Republican governor of Pennsylvania. Uh, so it should be viewed by people who care whether they're on the left or on the right about the core thing that was created in this period. So people are very interested in public affairs. I would love to have juniors in high and seniors in high school and freshmen and sophomores in college read the book. I want them to have a feel for the times, not just drab facts, but real people. And so I'm hoping to I'm frankly trying to figure out how to get the social studies teachers in Minnesota interested in this. Yeah, that's the second group. The, the, the third group is new Americans. They're the lifeblood of our country, and they're being marginalized, attacked, and deported. We need to have new Americans be fully in love with the democracy that they're coming to enrich. So that's the third group that I really would love to have them read, and I hope it's readable enough for them. So I think those are the three that I think of. I'd love to have get involved, and then hopefully people who aren't necessarily involved in politics, but just I hope it's a good enough book that they just find it interesting.
Well, you made a lot of really good points. I love what you said about the people that are going to be part of fully enriching our democracy, should fully enriching our democracy. Um, but with that, you brought up two things that I want to ask more about. First is your background. You have a background as in politics, working for the Minnesota State Legislature. Can you talk more about your background and, well, even your educational background and how that contributed to where you are today, having written this novel?
Well, I grew up in a family that was interested in politics. My dad was more of a Republican, mom was a Democrat. So, but it was at a time when we had leaders in both parties where it was a good thing to be in politics. It was Elmer Anderson, the governor, and Hubert Humphrey, president or senator. So part of my background just had this in my blood. It was like politics is not bad. It's important, and then the John Kennedy's campaign in 1960 kind of really sparked an interest in politics. I, he he brought enthusiasm and hope and optimism, so I became more involved then. And then basically, after being in the Peace Corps and journalism school, I came back and I was a precinct caucus chair and then a district chair. I got involved in the Democratic Party and ran unsuccessfully once in 76 and then got elected to the State House of Representatives in 78 um, and served there. And I think that experience educated me about just the variety of people, the variety of perspectives. It was at a time, Colin, when Democrats and Republicans liked each other. I mean, there, of course, there'd be animosity sometimes, but basically it was so different. Right? And so it came to feel like this is still a really good enterprise. I didn't get jaded by being in office. Then I ran for party chair and got elected. One of my candid worries is people will think, oh, this guy's just selling a Democratic piece of goods, and that's not true. I'm trying to make this book as even-handed as possible, based on part of how I grew up as in a bipartisan home. So I still believe in the best kind of politics, and I think even in recent years we've had well really good people. They may have made not good decisions, but I really think we've had Democrat and Republican presidents up until now who are pretty fine people, and I hope that people can regain some trust in politics because it's their system. Will tell you when you want me to what I think the two takeaways I had after I wrote the book that I couldn't write into the book. It was like insights that I couldn't get. One of the most important ones was we were given a gift in this period. We were given a gift about the ideals, the ideas, the need for how to structure government when the abuses came from not a well structured government, but it was a gift that's been improved over time, improved by having women vote, the civil rights movement, the rights for gays and lesbians, and today's world. It's been a gift. The democracy is a container of the most important jewel, and that jewel is freedom. And if we start seeing that democracy erode, don't make any mistake, freedom will be at risk. So I think what's going on now is of considerable concern. But for me, that was why didn't I think of this when I was writing it? But it's the gift, the metaphor, the gift that we've been given, and it's ours to protect that really moves me.
What would you say to people right now that are watching what's going on and are disillusioned by that gift, are disillusioned by the process, who feel like they don't have a voice? How do you recommend people get involved in their local community politics, state politics, national politics, and have their voices heard?
I think that there are a couple of things. First of all, there's some legitimacy to their disenchantment. There's way too much power, big money in politics. So people sense that they may not have as much impact as somebody with tons of money is too true. And so I don't blame people for that level of disillusionment, but I think the the things they can do is, first of all, pay attention and hold your elected leaders to account. Right now, particularly, I think of the members of Congress. I think they need to be viewed from the standpoint of, are you protecting the Constitution and the rule of law or not? And then communicate those thoughts both to your friends and to your fellow congregants, and certainly to the elected leaders. I think people underestimate their own power, and the ripple effect of even among your own group of friends can be considerable. And in doing that, listen respectfully to people you don't agree with. You can do that too. You are, as a citizen, a personal example of how it ought to be. I should also say I'm the co-chair of a group called Clean Elections Minnesota, which is about campaign finance reform and democracy issues. And we're allied with the League of Women Voters and Common Cause and We Choose Us. So if there's a local group that's advocating in the democracy space, support them, give them money, be aware of them, and celebrate them. And so I think it's the combination of your own voice, which you should never underestimate as a citizen, the power of your own voice, and tapping into groups that are trying to protect the democracy would be my short-term advice. And then finally, the 2026 elections are extremely important. If we're going to defend the Constitution and the rule of law, the outcome of that election is very important. And I'm going to just leave it at that.
Well, Todd, we've gotten into some heavy topics, some important topics, both in the past and in the present. But I want to wrap things up by just asking about writing this novel. Was it fun? How enjoyable was it to create this story, to be able to tell people about James Otis? What was that whole process like for you? Maybe some of the challenges, but also how rewarding was it?
I Parts of it were definitely fun. I really I didn't know exactly how it would go. I mean, everybody knows the arc of the history of this period, but uh, I enjoyed. I I had 5 or 6 drafts of this. I wound up hiring a really good writer to read it and give me advice. Patricia Francisco, who has written a number of books, read my second draft, and she had great suggestions that I took. And for example, I changed it from the first person to the third person. Otis was in the first person in my draft. It didn't work as well. So one thing, Colin, I wanted to tell you is there's the first biography of Otis was written in 1828 by one of the clerks of John Adams. And so there's a treasure trove of information about Otis in this 1828 biography. Um, so going through that, I went online, I read books about Hancock and Adams and Mercy, and took notes, got lots of legal pads. And then after a couple, maybe a year and a half or two, I started to write the chapters. What was most fun for me was the imagined dialogue. I really enjoyed, you'll see in the book, a number of meetings of 6 or 7 people. The dialogue, for example, between Hancock and Sam Adams, they're such different people. And when you write a book like this, you start to feel like you get to know them. And so it was really fun to imagine what they would say to each other as they were planning new stages of resistance. And then it reached the fifth version, and an old neighborhood friend wound up agreeing to be the agent, David Yanowski, who ran the Hungry Mind bookstore in St. Paul, and he connected me to Modern History Press in Michigan, and they said, "This is promising, but we want you to hire this particular editor," which I did. And then it got in the form that they published on the 4th of July last year. I enjoyed it. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I feel extremely grateful that it would be published. There's so many good writers that aren't published, and it's so tough. I tried to find an agent, and I had 13 applications for agents. 10 of them never responded. And I felt it was kind of a victory when 3 of them would say no, because at least they read my request. So I feel grateful that it was, and grateful for the blurbs that Amy Klobuchar and Tom Ridge and others have written. And so far, it seems to have been well received by the people who read it.
Well, Todd, congratulations and thanks so much for the work that you're doing. And I'm just so glad that we're able to connect and we can talk about sparks of the revolution.
Great. Thank you, Colin. I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate your role in helping people be aware of what our past relates to our present so much. So thank you.